Hello and welcome back to Modern World History. In this video, we're still talking about the actual war, but we're going to maybe call it part two. We're talking about the Pacific campaign. So, what was going on over there while Hitler and Mussolini were doing their thing and fighting off the British were trying to fight them off in North Africa and other places. So, the United States, we talked about last video how the U.S. was still isolationist. They didn't want to directly fight in the battle or in the war, but what they did do is they kind of supported the Allies with the Lend-Lease Act, meaning that as long as they were trade partners that were vital to the U.S. economy, they would provide loans and trade and things like that, but they're not going to supply military support just yet. But that was going to change on December the 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, and that is the Pearl Harbor. Here is an image of that. I'm sure you guys have all heard of this, or maybe even seen the movie. But the Japanese had plans in Southeast Asia. Americans knew this, all right? They cut off oil to the region and sent military support over to China to help them try to fight off the Japanese invasions. And so the United States was pretty open about their stance towards the Japanese expansion in the Pacific. It's just that they really hadn't done anything about it yet, and that probably really wasn't their focus. And so the Japanese also had planned to attack British and Dutch colonies. And in doing so, they also intended to take out the U.S. fleet in Hawaii. And so, Isoroku, I'm sure I'm going to pronounce this right, Isoroku Yamamoto was the greatest Japanese naval strategist, and here's the guy right here. And the United States, we also have to know that, with the decoding technology and things like that, the U.S. had known that there might be an attack, but they did not know where it was going to be. Okay, so that was the issue here, is that they weren't expecting an attack on Pearl Harbor. They were just simply expecting the possibility of there being an attack. And so when Pearl Harbor took place, it completely caught the United States off guard. The people that were there weren't ready. They weren't in their planes. It was the middle of the night. I do recommend, if you don't even if you don't watch the Pearl Harbor movie, go on YouTube and Google the Pearl Harbor attack scene, and just it's super dramatic, and it's a movie and all that, but it does a pretty good job. It's showing the degree in which the Americans at that base were scrambling to try to get in the planes and try to do something to launch some form of defensive against the onslaught. And by the way, I know I've been saying this a lot in the last few videos, that we are at the point historically where there's a lot of resources, like a lot of video stuff, that you guys are able to see, whether it's a modern movie or whether it's a old archive. But definitely, I think you guys should check these things out. So the damage report: 19 ships were sunk or damaged. 2,300 Americans get plus some. It's approximation. About 2,300 Americans were killed. About 1,100 were wounded. So this did a lot of damage. All right. The United States is now officially involved in World War II, and meanwhile, the Japanese didn't stop there. They conquered Hong Kong, Singapore, Java, Sumatra, Borneo, Burma, all these different places. They were looking. These are colonies. They were owned by European countries, the Dutch and the British, and so they had their sights set on India. And the thing is, the Japanese initially wanted to create an East Asia for the Asiatics. Okay, so in other words, they were very anti-colonialist. They wanted to get rid of European colonists in the area and the European influence and exploitation. But it was very, very quickly apparent that the Japanese weren't really going to be any different themselves, and they were incredibly cruel conquerors. If you look right here at this little snip from your textbook, it says that they made this troop out. Watch as they buried 6 of his scouts alive. They said they had those people they would dig their own graves, and then they knocked them out and buried them alive. So we're talking like just a lot of real sick, crazy stuff like that you know, and they were worse to the people who they conquered because they thought that surrendering was very dishonorable. In Japanese tradition, warriors would fight to the death, or even commit seppuku, or like a ceremonial suicide if they were defeated. And so they really did think that it was dishonorable for U.S. troops to surrender. They reserved the worst treatment for those individuals, but they were just terrible conquerors in general, and did cruel things to those who they took over. So the Japanese, for probably a little more than a month, had done their damage at Pearl Harbor. They had taken a lot of these colonies. They conquered over 1 million square miles of territory among these different islands in the Pacific. And it kind of seemed as though they might even be invincible. So I mean, they were having a lot of victories, and it kind of shook the Allies a little bit. But the under James Doolittle, the United States, with the help of Australians, are going to strike back, and they're going to go and bomb Tokyo. And this is really important, not because it did a huge amount of damage or turn the tide of battle. In fact, it really didn't do a whole lot in the grand scheme of things, but it had a very powerful psychological effect, and it shows that the Japanese are not invincible. Even the Japanese kind of recognized that, hey, you know what? If they can get here and bomb Tokyo, we are a little bit more open to attack than we thought. And it kind of really pointed to the fact that, there's still a chance that this war could be turned in favor of the Allies. And so by May 1942, the tide of war did begin to change. And the first example of this is going to be with the Battle of Coral Sea, where even though the Allies lost more planes and they lost more troops, they still were able to stop Japanese advances. All right, and so this kind of marked the end of the Japanese actual movement, their actual conquest. And then the Battle of Midway is going to take place, where Admiral Chester Nimitz surprised the Japanese fleet. The Japanese were going to go in on the island. They were going to take over. They were expecting a huge American offensive at this part. At this point, and but what happened was, as they were getting ready to transition to the island here, um, Nimitz had his planes go and surprise attack the Japanese when they weren't really quite yet ready to really take off, and he ends up destroying basically all their planes. He destroyed 4 aircraft carriers, which is just a major crushing blow to the entire naval forces of Japan here at the Battle of Midway. This is a major deal, and this right here is going to be the battle that really officially kind of turned the tide of the battle in the Pacific. And so at this point, the Allies are going to go on the offensive to make Japan submit. And so General Douglas MacArthur kind of employs the use of this island hopping strategy. So rather than go from island to island, knocking out Japanese strongholds that were heavily fortified and defended, he kind of was thinking, well, let's just kind of bypass these, all right, and go directly for the core, get close enough that we can put the pressure on Japan itself and end this. It's kind of like chess. When if you're playing chess and you send your queen like in a dangerous territory, but you know that if you do it right, you can kind of make your move, and then with a few other pieces secure the king, or I guess secure your victory by destroying their king. Kind of the same thing here for a chess analogy. And so the Battle of Guadalcanal was this here was a island that the Japanese were in the process of turning into a stronghold. And MacArthur knew that if they got close enough to Japan, if they could get Guadalcanal, it would put them within like a striking distance. And so it took about 6 months to fully defeat the Japanese here. It was a very, very nasty fighting. Just a nasty situation. If you read here, I know this is kind of blurry, but this snip here from Ralph Martin is saying that hell was red, furry spiders as big as your fist, enormous rats. Hell was sour, foul smell of the squishy jungle and the humidity that would rot a body within hours. It was a fanatic enemy that used its own dead as booby traps. Just kind of paraphrasing the quote. You guys can read that there. So this was no walk in the park. But it did put the United States into a position where they were going to be able to turn the tide of the battle in the Pacific and send Japan on the defensive. And what we're going to do is we are going to wrap up the war, but in this next video, there's another really important part of the war that we have to address. Something that was taking place during this war that would actually change our perception of how to handle situations like this, from that point all the way on to current time. And that is, we have to take a moment to talk about the Holocaust. So in the next video, we're going to look at the atrocities that occurred during the Holocaust. Thanks for watching.